March 2026. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East lay in absolute smoldering ruins following the shocking decapitation of the Iranian supreme leadership and the catastrophic retaliatory mining of the Strait of Hormuz. Global crude oil prices had violently shattered all historical records, surpassing $200 a barrel and plunging the entire Western Hemisphere into a crippling, unprecedented energy and financial crisis. Operating under a ruthless, uncompromising peace through overwhelming kinetic strength doctrine, the United States President, in direct coordination with the Israeli Prime Minister, authorized the ultimate unthinkable decapitation strike against the very beating economic heart of the Islamic Republic, Kharg Island. This heavily fortified island facility, floating in the Persian Gulf, single-handedly processes and exports over 90% of Iran's remaining crude oil. The highly classified mission, ominously designated Operation Blinding Light, was entrusted to the most technologically advanced, exorbitantly expensive, and terrifyingly lethal aviation package ever assembled in human history. Taking off under the cover of absolute darkness from deeply classified forward operating bases scattered across the Arabian Peninsula and the remote atoll of Diego Garcia, a joint U.S.-Israeli strike force formed up over the ocean. The spearhead consisted of ultra-stealth F-35 Adir fighters, acting as advanced sensor nodes and escorts for the true bringers of apocalypse. A flight of the newly operational B-21 Raider strategic stealth bombers. They were flying under the absolute strictest conditions of emission control, EMKON, emitting absolutely zero radar or radio waves, communicating only through heavily encrypted, highly directional intra-flight laser data links. The Pentagon's confidence in this operation was absolute. Relentless CIA, suppression of enemy air defenses campaigns conducted throughout early March were widely believed to have thoroughly eradicated Iran's increasingly antiquated Russian-supplied air defense networks. This was supposed to be a flawless surgical assassination of an entire nation's collapsing economy, executed silently by invisible digital ghosts reigning supreme in the night sky. The multi-billion-dollar stealth armada silently crossed the invisible threshold into the Iranian air defense identification zone at exactly 0200 hours. Flying incredibly fast and dangerously low over the pitch-black, choppy waters of the Persian Gulf to utilize the Earth's curvature to mask their approach. Inside the cramped, highly digitized, glowing cockpits, the world's most elite combat aviators calmly monitored their massive panoramic touchscreen displays, fully expecting a routine, completely unopposed bombing run. The B-21 Raiders looking like sleek, alien manta rays carved from pure darkness, silently cracked open their massive internal payload bay doors, preparing to unleash dozens of precision-guided, satellite-linked massive ordnance penetrators to permanently crater the oil terminals. However, as the flawless diamond formation breached the critical 50 nautical mile perimeter directly surrounding Kharg Island, the absolute, technologically impossible nightmare suddenly happened. Without a single warning klaxon, without a solitary enemy radar spike, and without any missile launch detection from their onboard supercomputers, the highly advanced, multi-million-dollar avionics across the entire stealth fleet began to violently and catastrophically malfunction. The F-35's state-of-the-art Distributed Aperture System, DAS, designed to give the pilot a seamless 360-degree view through the aircraft's floor, instantly filled with blinding, terrifying white static. The GPS coordinates on their primary flight displays violently froze, glitched, and then began jumping hundreds of miles in completely random, impossible directions at the speed of light. The pilots, rigorously trained for years to trust their digital instruments with their very lives, suddenly found themselves flying completely blind, deaf, and digitally paralyzed at supersonic speeds deep inside highly hostile, heavily defended enemy airspace. Unbeknownst to the combined might of Western intelligence agencies, Iran, Operating with deeply clandestine technological backing from its superpower allies, had secretly transformed Kharg Island into the world's largest, most impenetrable electromagnetic fortress. They had quietly activated a next-generation spoofing and jamming dome, a localized digital black hole that didn't just jam radio signals but actively rewrote the laws of physics for any electronic sensor entering its devastating radius. The fundamental, highly classified flaw of modern fifth-generation stealth technology was brutally and abruptly exposed to the world in a matter of agonizing seconds. Stealth aircraft are meticulously designed to be virtually invisible to radar, utilizing complex geometric angles and highly classified radar-absorbent materials to deflect electromagnetic waves, but they are absolutely not invisible to the naked human eye. Nor are they immune to advanced, purely optical passive sensors. By completely and violently neutralizing the American fleet's radar capabilities, GPS synchronization, and secure communication uplinks, the massive Iranian electronic warfare dome had essentially stripped the F-35s and B-21s of their invisible digital armor. It turned the most advanced warplanes on the planet into deaf, blind, and highly predictable aluminum targets flying straight and level. Suddenly, the pitch-dark sky above Kharg Island erupted into a terrifying, chaotic, and blinding inferno of tracer fire and flak. Instead of relying on easily detectable active radar tracking systems that the American jets could easily jam or evade, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC air defense battalions had reverted to a chillingly primitive Soviet-era but brutally effective tactical doctrine. They simultaneously unmasked dozens of heavily camouflaged, purely optically tracked anti-aircraft artillery, AAA, batteries and passive heat-seeking missile launchers hidden in the island's rocky terrain. Utilizing high-resolution passive thermal imaging cameras and massive old-school optical stereoscopic rangefinders that emitted absolutely zero electronic signature to trigger the plane's warning systems, the Iranian gunners manually targeted the massive blazing heat plumes of the American jet engines. The sky was instantly filled with a deadly, inescapable crisscrossing web of glowing shrapnel and high-explosive incendiary rounds, mercilessly tearing through the exact airspace where the supposedly invisible jets were now desperately struggling to navigate by the stars. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the cockpits of the world's most elite aviators as the sheer, terrifying volume of optical anti-aircraft fire rapidly intensified to horrific World War II proportions. The sleek, radar-absorbent composite skin of the stealth fighters, incredibly fragile, highly toxic when burned, and immensely expensive to maintain, was never designed to withstand a direct kinetic barrage of high-explosive 57mm and 23mm analog artillery shells. Warning alarms screamed deafeningly in the helmets of the F-35 pilots, not because their threat warning receivers had successfully identified the incoming ground-to-air missiles, but because the aircraft's internal diagnostic computers were registering catastrophic physical damage to the airframes. The threats were entirely analog, bypassing the digital shields completely. One F-35 Iadir took a terrifying, glancing blow to its right-wing root, shattering its composite internal structure and sending a violent, sickening shudder through the entire airframe. The desperate pilot was instantly forced to execute violently evasive, high-G tactical maneuvers that further disoriented his heavily corrupted, glitching navigation computers, pushing the pilot to the absolute brink of spatial disorientation and G-lock. G-force-induced loss of consciousness. The massive B-21 Raiders, entirely lacking the dogfighting agility and thrust-to-weight ratio of the smaller fighters, were forced to immediately abort their critical bombing runs. They aggressively slammed their throttles to maximum afterburner, a desperate survival move that ironically made their engine exhausts burn exponentially hotter, turning them into even brighter, more irresistible targets for the relentless Iranian thermal tracking cameras. The entire highly coordinated, flawlessly planned strike package had instantly disintegrated into a desperate, chaotic, every-man-for-himself scramble for basic survival. They were physically trapped inside the invisible walls of the electronic jamming dome, unable to coordinate a coherent retreat, completely unable to target the optical AAA batteries hiding below, and taking continuous, highly accurate kinetic fire from an entrenched enemy they literally could not see on their multi-million-dollar touchscreen displays. Hundreds of miles away, sitting in the heavily air-conditioned, deeply secure Combat Information Center of the USS Gerald R. Ford Supercarrier, Carrier Strike Group admirals watched in absolute paralyzed horror as the crucial telemetry data from their strike package began to violently glitch and vanish entirely from their giant holographic tactical screens. The sudden, nauseating realization that their most advanced, supposedly invincible stealth armada was currently being systematically butchered by low-tech optical anti-aircraft fire sent a cold, terrifying sweat down the spines of the entire Pentagon leadership. With the localized electronic warfare environment around Kharg Island proving completely impenetrable to modern smart weapons, like precision JDAMs, glide bombs, or modern cruise missiles that rely heavily on continuous GPS positioning and satellite uplinks to find their targets, the U.S. Navy was forced to make an immediate, unthinkable, and desperate tactical decision. They had to reach deep into the analog past in order to save the digital weapons of the future from total annihilation. The emergency execution order was urgently flashed to the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and the submerged Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines forming the outer protective ring of the Carrier Strike Group. In a deafening, synchronized roar of solid propellant rocket motors that lit up the ocean surface, a massive, overwhelming salvo of over 60 BGM-109. Tomahawk land attack missiles violently erupted from the vertical launch systems, tearing into the night sky toward Iran. But these were absolutely not standard, modern Tomahawks. In a frantic, last-minute reprogramming effort below decks, naval weapons officers had completely disabled and bypassed the missile's advanced GPS receivers and terrain-matching radar guidance modules. Instead, they commanded the missiles to rely solely and exclusively on their incredibly precise but strictly internal analog inertial navigation systems, INS. A complex mechanical arrangement of spinning physical gyroscopes and accelerometers that are physically impossible to electronically jam, hack, or spoof simply because they require absolutely no external signals from the outside world to calculate their position. The massive swarm of intentionally deaf and blind Tomahawk cruise missiles screamed towards the burning sky over Kharg Island, flying dangerously low just above the crests of the ocean waves, navigating purely on complex mathematical dead reckoning and the relentless spinning of their mechanical gyroscopes. They slammed violently into the island's industrial infrastructure with devastating, earth-shattering kinetic force, creating massive fireballs that illuminated the Gulf. While these analog-guided missiles entirely lacked the pinpoint window-sized precision accuracy of modern GPS-guided munitions, their sheer, overwhelming explosive volume and brute force was more than enough to completely obliterate the heavily fortified power grids, local communication nodes, and the massive, delicate electronic warfare antenna arrays that were actively generating the impenetrable spoofing dome. The exact moment the Iranian high-tech EW generators were physically pulverized into burning slag by the Tomahawks, the invisible digital black hole over the island instantly collapsed. In a fraction of a second, the frozen, glitching GPS screens inside the battered, smoking F-35s and B-21s flooded back to brilliant life, successfully locking back onto the secure military satellite constellations and instantly restoring the pilot's critical situational awareness. Their targeting computers instantly mapped the previously hidden Iranian optical batteries, painting them red on the visors. However, with their vital stealth coating severely compromised by shrapnel and several airframes critically damaged, the airborne mission commander issued an immediate, deeply humiliated abort and RTB, return to base, order over the newly cleared radio frequencies. The bleeding, heavily scarred American and Israeli strike package hit their afterburners frantically fleeing the heavily contested airspace they were supposed to absolutely dominate, leaving the Kharg Island oil terminals burning but functionally intact. The Pentagon had narrowly, miraculously avoided the catastrophic, highly public loss of billions of dollars in classified aviation assets and elite pilots. But the geopolitical reality of the night was a crushing, undeniable, and historic defeat. The Western Alliance had just learned a terrifying, bloody lesson. The ultimate fatal vulnerability of a purely digital, network-centric military when it is unexpectedly forced to fight an enemy perfectly willing and capable of weaponizing the brutal simplicity of the analog past.